Hey everybody, HomeSliceHenry here, and in today's video, I'm going to be showcasing the team that I used to reach Legend rank on my wife's account in only 380 total battles. Now normally, I don't make it to Legend rank on my wife's account until much later in the season, so reaching Legend this early was a pretty big shock. But I ended up finding a very strong team in the Fantasy Cup that worked very well. The team is Shadow Giratina altered on the lead, with Shadow Waterfall Empoleon and Florges in the back. I'm not typically a big fan of Florges in the Open Grade League, but in the Fantasy Cup, Florges proved to have some very nice coverage as it ended up closing out a ton of games. So without further ado, let's hop into the matches, and in game number 1, we're off to a pretty terrible start, leading Shadow Giratina into Como-O. Now this is a pretty massive core breaker, as Como-O can hit for super effective damage into both the Empoleon and the Giratina. I'm able to grab an early shield, I'm going to try and go for a catch, but my opponent is insanely patient. They're able to hold on to their energy and respond to the Florges catch attempt by sending in Alolan Sandslash. The good news for me is that Alolan Sandslash actually does not have an amazing matchup into a Florges. I'm going to be putting up at least one shield because I do want to preserve just a little bit of HP, and I will fire off another Chilling Water. The bad news for me, however, is I believe this is going to fall just short of taking the knockout, and that's going to let Alolan Sandslash make it to a second charge attack. This is a double debuff drill run, but it will unfortunately put me in a range where my opponent is going to be able to knock me out with an upper hand. And they left with 100 energy, so this energy is still going to be a pretty big problem. Now, I send in Giratina. It looks like my opponent is not throwing any energy. Instead, they're going to try and fully farm me down. Dragon Claw does force the final shield. They will get the full farm down, but I think they're in waterfall range. So I can put up the shield, the waterfall will go through. They have back-to-back upper hands, but they're going to lose this energy. In the back, my opponent has their own waterfall Empoleon, but being down one waterfall means this game is over. I can just double up on Hydro Cannons, opponent sees the writing on the wall, and concedes the match. Unfortunately, the leads are not getting easier, as in game number 2, I lead Shadow Giratina into Togetic. I save switch into the Shadow Empoleon, and my opponent is going to respond with a shiny Shadow Fortress. The Volt switches are adding up, but this is a very important bait out. My Florges would have a very bad matchup. My opponent does not commit to the farm down here, may be worried about damage registration errors, so they will fire off the Sand Tomb, but in doing so, that guarantees that I'll get this Hydro Cannon and pressure away my opponent's final shield. And shields down, I should have a lot easier time dealing with that Togetic. Unfortunately, I am going to be pretty heavily debuffed here on the Giratina, as Fortress is going to make it to one Rock Tomb, and they should make it to a second Rock Tomb as well. I'm a little worried my opponent's going to aggressively pivot into the Togetic and try and snipe me down, but they don't. They stay in. However, I'm double debuffed, so I'm forced to pivot out into Florges, and in the back, my opponent has Turtonator. This matchup is very bait dependent. If Turtonator lands the overheat, they win the game. But if I'm able to successfully shield an overheat or call a Dragon Claw, then I could be okay. I no shield, and it's a Dragon Claw. We get the call right, and now I think we should be in a pretty good position. I fire off the Chilling Water, my opponent now very heavily debuffed, and I'm very okay just letting this go. I believe this is only enough for a Dragon Claw. It's not even enough for an overheat. They're actually on Brutal Swing, and they pivot out, saving the Turtonator and sending back in Togetic. However, I have quite a bit of energy on the Florges. Florges is going to make one Chilling Water. I make a second Chilling Water as well. It looks like my opponent just played to a CMP tie that they do not win. Togetic losing the charge attack priority to the Florges means that I'm now in a dominant position. Psyshock will take the knockout, but I have the Shadow Sneak loaded on the Giratina. And Shadow Sneak actually does do quite a lot of damage. So I shield up the Psyshock, fire off the Shadow Sneak, and Togetic just does not have the HP remaining. They get knocked out, back in comes the Turtonator, opponent sees the writing on the wall, and concedes the match. We pick up a pretty tough lead in the next match, Shadow Giratina into Giratina Origin. Now this matchup is tough because Giratina outpaces and wins charge attack priority. However, a lot of Giratina Origins like to throw baits, so I actually end up no shielding, calling the Ominous Wind bait, and now I can guarantee shield advantage or a knockout. My opponent puts up a shield, and I'm going to pivot into Florges. The reason I'm sending in Florges here is because the usual backline for a Giratina lead would be double water. If it's double water, I want a big energy head start on the Florges. My opponent sends in the Shadow Waterfall Empoleon, and it looks like this is the team that I featured. This is actually an extra small Shadow Empoleon as well. I hadn't seen an extra small Empoleon before. That is absolutely adorable. Oh my goodness. Empoleon going to overfarm quite significantly, and I'm realizing that if it's a Azumarill in the back, I do not want to take any more fast move damage. So I fire off this Trailblaze on alignment. This will take the knockout, the waterfall damage will never register, and now I can make a Trailblaze into a Azumarill. My opponent should go for a catch here, so we actually simultaneously switch Giratina into Giratina. I I send in Empoleon, get the waterfall down, and now this game is over because I didn't let my opponent catch the Trailblaze. A lot had to go right for me to win this game, calling the bait, not letting my opponent get the catch, but several good reads in a row is a recipe for success. They land the Hydro Pump, that's big damage onto the Empoleon. Empoleon will not be able to do enough damage with Drill Peck in the waterfalls, but having that charge attack loaded on Florges is my insurance policy. Switch timer's up, in comes the Florges, there's the combo play, Trailblaze takes down Azumarill, and we escape with the win. We've got a very tough opponent in the next match, 2024 Pokemon Go World Champion Yakai, and it's a terrible lead as he leads Grimmsnarl into my Giratina. I safe switch Empoleon, he stays in to get a bunch of energy and then catches the Hydro Cannon onto Azumarill. So far, this could not be going much worse. Yakai is playing perfectly, and he has maximized the advantage that he has team comp-wise. I farm up to the back-to-back Drill Pecks, and he CMP ties me. He is not going to let me get a shield advantage. Drill Peck connects, but I'm forced to go down a shield if I want switch advantage. And switch advantage is a must for me here. I absolutely need switch advantage. I cannot have the Grimmsnarl absolutely shredding my poor Giratina to smithereens. I fire off Drill Peck, shield comes up from the Azumarill, and he's not going to let me get another Drill Peck. His counts are perfect. I'm forced to double shield because I need switch advantage no matter the cost. Here, I will fire off the Drill Peck to guarantee switch advantage or the final shield. I do get switch advantage, but it's Aegislash in the back. Yakai's running my own team, and unfortunately, I just lose. I'm going to get swept by Aegislash. There's no point in playing it out, and I will resign the match. Bad news for me, it's not getting any easier as my next opponent is 2025 Pokemon Go World Champion Beelzeboy. Now this is a much better lead for me. At the very least, it's not Grimmsnarl completely destroying my Giratina. Shadow Giratina into Stunfisk is pretty neutral overall, and if I can get a shield call right on an Earthquake, that should put me pretty far ahead. I do get the shield call right, there's going to be a safe switch into Shadow Empoleon, and I'm more than happy to stay in here and look to pressure an advantage with the Shadow Sneak. Shadow Sneak will be shielded, I farm up, trying to go for a catch, but he's much too patient. However, the good news for me is that I'm actually able to make this Hydro Cannon on charge attack priority, and this Empoleon's IVs are so bad that I'm always going to be winning charge attack priority. At this point, I've gotten both shields, so the job is done. I'm very happy just to let the Empoleon go. He's going to get a pretty big farm down, but I can send in Giratina, and Giratina is going to absorb this Drill Peck no problem, and hopefully get a farm down before the second move is reached. But he pivots out, revealing in the back he has Grimmsnarl, and this is very, very good for me. There's a Grimmsnarl on the team, but it's aligned against my best Grimmsnarl counter. Foul Play still does so much resistant damage. The offensive power of Grimmsnarl is terrifying, but I go for the Trailblaze, it does do more damage, and it ramps up the Fairy Winds. Florges able to get the farm down. I still have the shield intact as well, and back in comes the Galarian Stunfisk. I'll overfarm as much as possible, CMP tying the Galarian Stunfisk. Boosted Chilling Water will take the knockout. All that's left in the back is the Empoleon, and that's a full 1v3 Florges sweep to take the win. Giratina versus Azumarill in the next game. This is not an amazing matchup. Shadow Giratina, I believe, can win the twos, but ideally, you don't really want to invest two shields when you have a Pokemon like Shadow Empoleon in the back. So I'm going to overfarm massively, fire off the Shadow Sneak, and I will look to try and go for a catch and sneak onto the Empoleon. No matter what they threw, I'm very happy to absorb the energy here, and it was an Ice Beam, so it's double resisted. That is even better. The Azumarill's staying in. They farm up a ton of energy, and if they're staying in, they're probably pretty weak in the back, so I will put up a shield. They go for the Hydro Pump. That works out pretty nicely for me. They try and go for a Drill Peck catch onto Galarian Stunfisk, and they are going to regret that. Hydro Cannon lands, devastating damage. Maybe they're double ground in the back because my opponent will resign the match. We've got a battle of shadows in the next match. Shadow Giratina into Shadow Empoleon. Now, this is a Metal Sound Empoleon, so it's running the more traditional moveset. I'm more than happy to absorb a Drill Peck and then look to fire off the Shadow Sneak before they make Drill Peck number 2. So I fire off the Shadow Sneak. This will easily knock out unless my opponent puts up a shield, but they do not. They let it go, and instead they send in Hydreigon. The good news for me is I have a pretty good answer to Hydreigon. The bad news is a Shadow Fly would still do so much damage. So I will invest in the HP of my Florges and put up a shield. Hydreigon is going to pivot out. In the back is a Waterfall Primarina, and this is looking pretty good for me. My Empoleon is very, very strong into Primarina. I'm just going to look to bank energy and get a catch and sneak onto the Empoleon. Getting that Waterfall head start is huge because now I'm always going to be able to outpace the Primarina. If Primarina wants a chance in this game, it's going to be by fully Waterfalling down. This is a pretty terrible IV Empoleon, so there is a decent chance that I get farmed here. My opponent pivots out into Hydreigon, but I actually don't want to take the knockout. Instead, I only hit just a few bubbles. And that is perfect because that sets up a 2 Fairy Wind farm down, letting me leave with the Trailblaze loaded. Primarina stored all the energy in the world, but it's not going to get to use it. Hydro Cannon shielded on the CMP tie. Trailblaze is super effective damage. You better believe that is knocking out Primarina. And with that nasty undercharge, we take the win and clutch the set to make it to Legend rank. Now this got us up to 30-43. I believe we ended up playing a 3-2 set afterwards to get to 30-47, and I will have a few select battles from that as well. Picking up a very bad lead in the next match, Shadow Giratina into Altaria. The good news at the very least is I should be able to force a shield advantage, and then I can send in Empoleon, because the threat of a Dragon Claw is pretty severe. I Shadow Sneaked here to cover for a catch onto Empoleon. I mean, they have to shield it anyway, but they don't end up shielding, and suddenly that looks to be a pretty terrible mistake. What looks to be even worse is the fact that the Shadow Empoleon is answered with Ferrothorn. However, the thing you have to know about Ferrothorn is it is terrible. Even in limited metas, Ferrothorn is just awful. It should, in theory, be pretty good, but Bullet Seed is atrocious. Look at this. I'm a Shadow Waterfall Empoleon. I'm basically walled here, and I'm just going to double shield and waterfall down a Ferrothorn after landing one Drill Peck. They're forced to pivot out because they would have just gotten fully farmed. They send in the Altaria, Drill Peck lands, I waterfall that down as well, and this Shadow Empoleon is completely taking over the game. My opponent reveals their final Pokemon in the back is Corviknight. Switch timers are very heavily misaligned here. I fire off the Hydro Cannon, that gets the shield, and now I'm going to send in Florges. Conventional wisdom says that I should debuff them with Chilling Water as soon as I get it, but I do want to try and throw at less than obvious times to try and make it more difficult for my opponent to get a catch. So I will slightly overfarm and then begin the process of slowly chipping away at Corviknight's HP bar. Corviknight importantly did not get the boost. I overfarm quite a bit, still watching for the catch, and my opponent is just not going for it. Instead they go for yet another Air Cutter. I go for the Chilling Water and I get caught on anyway. All that caution thrown to the wind, and that could end up costing me, as the Corviknight, by switching out and catching, has reset the debuffs. Air Cutter lands, but Florges survives. Even with these very mediocre IVs, Florges able to hang on and make the Chilling Water. Chilling Water applies the debuff, in comes Giratina. These Shadow Claws are adding up. Corviknight gonna go for the Air Cutter. Air Cutter is gonna be putting Giratina very low. They do get the farm down, and the game comes down to this. If they make Air Cutter, they don't win. They need a payback. Is this the payback moment of truth? It's the Air Cutter. Shadow Empoleon survives, and we get the win. Hopping into the next match, leading Shadow Giratina into Giratina Origin. We've seen this lead before. Again, how I like to play this is by trying to call the bait. Even if you end up getting Shadow Balled, I still think it's better than shielding an Ominous Wind. Shielding an Ominous Wind just puts you in a really tough spot. So I end up no shielding. I go 2 for 2 on calling Ominous Winds, and I'm going to follow the same play pattern as before. Once I get the shield, I'm hard pivoting into Florges, because Florges up energy is almost always strong into the backline of Giratina Origin leads. My opponent does bait me with Ominous Wind, and there it is, right on cue, there is the Shadow Empoleon. So this is probably the same team that I played against earlier. My Giratina Origin, Shadow Waterfall Empoleon, and Azumarill team. So far, everything has gone right, in that I was able to get the energy advantage on the Florges and generate a shield advantage by calling a bait early on in the game. I'm going to fire off the Trailblaze as soon as I get there because I don't really care about the timing. What I care about is having as much HP as possible to ensure that I can survive 3 bubbles. I'm expecting my opponent, like the last opponent, will try and go for the catch. So I'm going to farm up to it, switch into Giratina as my opponent switches in their own. They exit very close to a move, but not close enough as I snipe down with the waterfall, and that is going to seal the win. A very similar game to last time, a different opponent though, but a trainer running the same team in a very similar manner. But with 2 Ominous Wind bait calls and not letting either opponent catch that Trailblaze back onto the Giratina, we're in a spot where we are going to be able to somehow escape with wins in both matches. I overfarm, playing to the CMP tie, Drill Peck to the Play Rough, and now, with that Trailblaze loaded in the back, there is just no lose con for me. The Drill Peck barely missed the knockout. If it KO'd, I wouldn't have even needed the move, but we have the move, so we may as well throw it. Back in comes the Florges, firing off the Trailblaze. Trailblaze, massive overkill onto Azumarill to secure the win. Hopping into the final match, and we actually get a rematch from a previous opponent. We led into Togetic, I believe it was game 2 of the video, and we were barely able to emerge with a win. But now, can we survive in a rematch? So far, the alignment is pretty bleak. Togetic into Giratina, and the Shadow Shiny Fortress into Shadow Empoleon. My opponent will fire off the Sand Tomb, and I have to make the call. Can I survive the Volt Switch at -1 defense? I believe that I can, so I go for it, and I actually get the Hydro Cannon. That is very nice, as that gets both of my opponent's shields. They do get a pretty healthy farm down, but I'm going to be using the Shadow Giratina as a damage sponge and trying to set up the Florges sweep. What I learned from last time was my opponent was not running Overheat. They were running Brutal Swing and Dragon Claw, and that means they're going to be completely walled by my Florges. Giratina gets hit with a second Rock Tomb, I get the full farm down, and it's once again going to be the Florges show. My opponent gonna stay in with Togetic. I'm putting up the shield because I haven't gotten to apply any debuffs yet. Togetic will go for the Heat Wave, there's the switch, and in comes the Turtonator. But I felt pretty comfortable putting up the shield knowing that in the back they had a Mon that was going to be completely walled. Because the Turtonator, it's debuffed, and it can't really do any meaningful damage. The Turtonator is now at -2 attack. I mean, Dragon Claw is double resisted, Brutal Swing is single resisted, but doesn't get same type attack bonus. They just really can't damage the Florges. They go for the Dragon Claw, that does less than nothing. This is such a golden opportunity for Florges to get a big energy head start. But their switch timer's up, and back in comes the Togetic. Looks like I have enough HP to make it to a second Chilling Water as well, and then the game is going to come down to a 50-50. Do I snipe with the Giratina? Do they predict that I snipe? I say that they predict the snipe. So I stay in and they fire off the Psyshock, expecting that I would try and combo play with the Giratina, but we get the call right. Back in comes Giratina. Shadow Sneak is loaded. Shadow Sneak easily more than enough to knock out the Togetic. Back in comes Turtonator. That gets Shadow Claw down, and that is a good game. Man, this team ended up being way more fun than I was expecting. I kind of just threw 3 Pokemon together because there were 3 of the Pokemon that my wife had on her account. Now, unfortunately, on my account, I did 3 of the Giratina radars, and all the Shadow Giratinas were terrible. She did 1, and she ended up getting the rank 5 Great League Shadow Giratina. So it was cool to get to use a good IV Shadow Giratina for a change, but I do feel like hopefully this team can be a bit inspiring to people who feel that maybe their lack of IVs or lack of good IVs on Pokemon is holding them back. This team featured a 9, 11, 10 Florges and a Shadow Empoleon that was like 11, 5, 11. So the majority of the team had pretty terrible IVs. I would say the biggest thing when it comes to a lot of Pokemon is just having the Pokemon. When it comes to like XL Pokemon like a Corsola or an Azu, the IVs matter significantly more, but for a lot of these more basic Pokemon, especially if you're a trainer who's starting out and you don't have a lot of these, the biggest barrier to entry is just getting the Mon. Even if it's a bad IV Mon that you traded from a family member, from a friend, having the Mon is a great place to start, and then you can potentially work in the future on trying to get a good one. But just having the Mon in a lot of circumstances to me is significantly more important than having like the perfect rank 1, because this is a deeply imperfect team. There's some pretty bad IVs across the board, and yet this team made it up to number 19 in the world on the Go Battle League leaderboards. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed watching today's video, please do help support the channel by leaving a like on the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't, and an extra special thank you as always to our channel members here on YouTube. Your guys' support continues to help me do what I do, so thank you guys oh so very much, and until next time, I've been HomeSliceHenry.